big things are happening in antitrust, finally, in the United States. A couple weeks ago, Lina Khan was appointed FTC chairwoman. She is a young, well-known opponent of monopolies and the standard that's been used to excuse them for the last few decades, which is consumer welfare. So if corrupt practices such as paying kickbacks to get your product sold or deliberately taking losses to undersell a competitor don't result in higher prices for consumers immediately, they haven't really been enforced too strongly. So she's against that. She's for breaking up the big tech companies. And within 2 weeks of her taking the job, the Congressional Judiciary Committee just voted on bipartisan lines, 21-20, to split up the big tech companies. I put a link to this post by Matt Stoller, who studies monopolies and wrote a book on them, in the description of this video. It goes into the weeds a bit, but in a nutshell, the Judiciary Committee's legislation isn't perfect. It's got some loopholes, and of course it has to go to the full Congress. So it's the beginning of a process. But looks like we're further along on this than I think a lot of us thought was possible even a few weeks ago. So with that in mind, let's look at hedging another one of these big tech oligopolies. We looked at Amazon a couple weeks back. Let's take a look at hedging Google. So we'll open up the portfolio on our iPhone app and we'll type in the symbol for Google. Alphabet Inc., its parent company. And we'll type in a number of shares. Here I'll just put in 100. And then here we type in the largest decline we're willing to risk over the time frame of the hedge. So let's say 20%. And we'll stick with our default time frame to expiration. And here we're showing a cost of $42.70 or 1.68% of position value to hedge 100 shares against a greater than 20% decline out until mid-December. So we can play around with this to try to lower the cost a bit. One thing to bear in mind is this cost is calculated conservatively using the ask price of the puts. So in practice, you can often buy and sell options at some price between the bid and ask. One thing we can do here is, if we don't think this is going to happen or the risk may develop in the next 6 months or so, we can go out as far as possible. This takes us out to January of 2023. And if we do that, the cost goes up to 8.11%. Cost as a percentage of position value is 5.18. So just to look back at the default time from expiration, the annualized cost is actually higher if we go out longer. But it may be worth it to lock in a relatively low hedging cost over a long period of time, given current volatility. If you want to look at the other direction, you could, let's say, we'll try hedging out to October 15th. In this case, we lower the cost to $22.70 or 0.89% of position value, and we lower the annualized cost further to 2.99. If you want to wipe out all of the cost, you can try capping your possible upside. So, and here's a description of what this means. Let's try 15% here. And we do that, and it doesn't wipe out all the costs here. It gets it down to $530 or 0.21% of position value or 0.7% annualized. So we can go back and we can try 14%. $350. Skip ahead, we'll try 12%. So now we've got a negative hedging cost. This means you would collect a net credit of $690, assuming, again, to be conservative, that you bought the puts at the ask and sold them at the bid when opening this hedge. Now, let's see what happens if we go to our default expiration with those same parameters. Now, your net credit goes up to $2,040, or 0.8% of position value, or 1.7% negative annualized. We can also try going out all the way out to January of 2023, and now your net credit goes up to $10,200. So your cost would be negative 4% or negative 2.57% annualized. So you can play around with this. You could also, if you're going out to the longest expiration, let's try 20%. You can probably get to a negative cost for that. And yeah, you can. So you can raise your cap to 20%, and in this case, you still have a negative cost of $3,500, which equals a net credit of $3,500, or negative 1.38% of position value as a net cost, or negative 0.88% annualized. So different ways to skin this cat, but it is possible to cost effectively hedge Google out over the next several months and next couple of years if you are concerned about the threat of antitrust. Something to consider.